President Cyril Ramaphosa will deliver a keynote address at the annual Armed Forces Day celebrations in Polokwane. The event, which is meant to expand public understanding of the role of the SANDF, forms part of the 25th anniversary of South Africa's democratic force. ENCA's Thulisizwe Similani is there. Tell us what we can expect today. How's it going to play out?
Well, Jane, we are building up to the start of the festivities here at Armed Forces Day 2020, and the significance of it, I believe I should mention that it was at this hour, on the 21st of February in 1917, that the SS Darrow plowed into the SS Mendi in the English Channel, leading to colossal loss of life. Hundreds of South Africans from the native labor cause were killed in there, and that's the significance of why we mark it on this day. It was exactly at this hour that Isaac Wauchope Dioba said the famous words now that be quiet and calm, my countrymen, for what is taking place now is exactly what you came to do. Brothers, we are drilling the drill of death. We are sons of Africa. Just an excerpt from what he is believed to have said as the SS Mendi went down. So on this day, we mark Armed Forces Day, but it's also an opportunity, Jane, to reflect on the state of the military, the South African National Defence Force, and all its capabilities. In a moment, I'll be in conversation with Garth, and we'll be continuing to look into the state of the South African National Defence Forces. But I want to check in with ENCA's Michael Appel, who's spent a week basically just gauging, as you saw his report a few minutes ago, about the state of the South African Military Health Services, those people who come through whenever South Africa needs some kind of assistance. We saw them in the Northwest. So Michael, if you can hear me, just talk to me about your sense of have engaged the four arms of service. You've engaged with their various capacities. We talk about the critical underfunding of the South African National Defence Force, given what they have to do, the mandate that they have to carry out. What were you able to observe? What is the impact of this underfunding? All right, I will go back to Michael Appel in a few minutes. He's set up along the path where the parade will be taking place, where he'll be looking out. He'll be our eyes and ears in as far as the parade is concerned. So I'll touch base with him in a few minutes. But let me talk to Garth Benny. Sorry, Garth. my apologies for that. Garth, so the situation we've been talking about, the critical underfunding, we were saying that it will be critical in the conversation that will be taking place here. Let's talk about the state of the army, right? Because the Air Force and the South African Navy, some will say at least, got something from what we now know as the arms deal, the strategic defense procurement package. How critical does the South African army need to be looked at by way of funding?
If we look at the conventional forces of the South African Army, namely your infantry, your artillery, your combat units as such, much of their strategic weaponry is in fact originates from the 1980s context. So let's take the mechanized infantry formations, for example. 1 South African Infantry and 4 South African Infantry battalions. They are still equipped with Ratel variant vehicles, 81mm Ratels, 90mm, 20mm Ratels. That's the standard fighting platform for the mechanized infantry. These vehicles were built in the 1980s. Appropriate then, they're still appropriate in certain contexts now. However, they are aging and threats have changed. You know, your irregular forces in Africa, in Congo, in the emergence of ISIS, for example, as well. And what we see in North Africa, I mean, they're armed with 23mm cannons essentially on the back of a bakkie. And those hardwares can shoot to pieces a Ratel in no time at all. The Army didn't benefit from the strategic arm package procurement process in the early 2000s. As you mentioned, it was the Navy and the Air Force. So there is an upgrade necessary there, and there was in fact plans afoot to re-equip the Army mechanized formations with the Badger vehicle. However, due to budget constraints, that is on hold. So again, it's a bit of a patchwork process.
So, Garth, if I'm watching at home and I'm thinking, we have problems in South Africa. I mean, as we speak, the students were talking about the inability to re-register because of outstanding debts. People will be saying there's ESCOM and load shedding and power outages. We need to fix that, and the debt burden there, and there's SAA and the whole debate about whether or not to keep it. So where should we rank this by order of priority? 52 billion rand budgeted for the whole defense spending. Much of it goes to paying the wage bill. Why should that take priority over SAA, for example?
Well, if you look at the wage bill, I mean, 56% of the budget goes on salaries. However, in certain NATO countries, 51% goes on salaries. So that's not too out of sync. However, we're not necessarily getting bang for our buck there. If we look at defense as a sector, defense has an enormous technological contribution to the economy. However, that contribution can't be made if you're underfunded. Secondly, in terms of skills development, I mean, the military formations have the means to develop high-tech skills for the economy. Again, underfunded as well. There are many pressing priorities in the South African society, many pressing socio-economic needs. We see the high levels of inequality and poverty that exist in this country. However, it appears that there's not enough money to go around. So, in a sense, it's about a case of putting out fires. And that's not necessarily strategic.
Let me ask you the question the way I asked of you off air. If you had limited resources and you were Tito Mboweni and you were faced, Tito Mboweni and Pravin Gordhan, and I suppose in this case Edin Nosiviwe Mapisa Ngagula, and you were faced with the choice between saving SAA, pumping billions into SAA to save that airline, and pumping a few more billion into the South African National Defence Force, which one would you choose?
Well, if in an ideal world, one asks oneself the question, is government's role to actually run an airline? Or is that not the role of the private sector? In my view, I would say I'd find, let the private sector run the airline and allocate resources to a government function, which is defence.
All right. Garth, we'll continue to have the conversation.
Indeed.
The next time we talk, we'll be talking a bit more about the other arms of service, the Air Force, whether or not, you know, given the 25, 26 Hawks that we have and the 26 Gripens that we have and 24 Hawks that we have, what capacity do we actually have by way of the Air Force, but also the Navy, the frigates and the submarines that we do have. So this is the build-up, Xoli and Jane, to Armed Forces Day, and it will be, the highlight will be, of course, the parade by the various arms of service who will be parading in the street behind me that you see there, and our Michael Appel will be watching all of that, and of course there'll be a speech by President Cyril Ramaphosa, whose task it will be to grapple with some of these questions we've been raising with Garth about how do you prioritize defense. We are currently spending just about 1.2% of our GDP on defense spending, and by many accounts that's simply not enough in the current world that we live in.
All right, we'll be checking in with you throughout the day. Thanks, Thulas.